Right, well, hello and welcome. And as you can see from the festive background and my silly hat, this is the Christmas special of Desert Island Drams. Welcome to Whiskey and Cynicism yet again. You'll see with me I have a very good friend of mine in Deeks, Mr. Deacon. Slightly different format. You can see both of us on screen at all times, so double the chat all the time. So this is going to be basically a slightly different format. We're going to do some drams together, which has never really been done on this format. So I've been very kind of stingy at Christmas time. I'm the Scrooge character in all this, and I've sent Deeks one dram, and he's been exceptionally generous and sent me three. We don't know what they are, respectively, so I don't know what the three he sent me are, and he doesn't know what the one that he's got is. And we're going to ask some questions back and forth. It's not going to be the one-way street that it normally is. We're going to have a bit of a chat, talk about some drams, talk about Christmas time, especially in what has been a challenging year for us all, especially those in the industry. And although this is Whiskey and Cynicism, and I know there can be some piss-taking, sometimes some fairly abject, cynicism, skepticism, all those kind of things, we'd like to be more optimistic and a bit more fun and positive today. So before we get any further, Deeks, welcome along. Merry Christmas to you. And
Merry Christmas.
So all well, you're in, tell the viewers at home, you're down south. How are things in that part of the world?
Yeah, so to everyone watching, I'm Deeks. I've been working in the drinks industry for about 20 years now. Currently living in Devon, but Simon and I spent a bit of time together in Edinburgh. Mostly enjoying whiskey, but also becoming good pals as well. It's a funny old time down here. I'm a territory manager in the drinks industry, kind of covering that southwest and south of Wales sort of area. And there's a bit of a split in the minute because we've got Cornwall in tier 1, as it's being called, and they're just lording it up down there. I say lording it up, they can go for a pint. Which feels like lording it up in a year like this. So yeah, it's and then I'm on the other side of the border in Devon, basically looking through the prison bars over the River Tamar, which is where Plymouth is, funnily enough, and where a lot of I suppose persons such as yourself, as in Australians, convicts, would have left this country, looking through those prison bars. So yeah, it's pretty quiet, it's pretty unusual. Christmas feels like it's going to be a bit of a quiet one, to be honest. But at the same time, we're able to do this kind of thing and liven it up a little bit. So I'm still looking forward to it, but not quite the same way as what we would have done beforehand.
Absolutely, it is such a strange year for all concerned. But I think let's get a dram in the glass. I've got a glass of bubbles here because it is Christmas Day after all. And also, a good friend of mine, Ross, in Australia, has coined the term bowler maker in the last year. So rather than a half and a half, it's a glass of fizz and a whiskey. So I thought of all days to do it, this is appropriate. So what's in your glass just now? Is that one of the ones you've sent me?
No. This was just what I was drinking after my dinner tonight. So I brought the bottle along. It's a little Pulteney 12-year-old, which I've really kind of got into my old Pulteneys recently. Based right in the north of Scotland, up in Wick. It's got that. It's quite approachable. It's quite malty. It's not overtly rich. It's not overtly sherried, but it has this beautiful salinity to it. Which it's a really nice one. It kind of kick off the palate as much as anything and cleanse away everything that I've had from my dinner, which, if anyone was interested, was a lasagna. So not particularly festive, but I'm sure we'll talk about what's a good dram to have with your dinner at some point during this call.
Absolutely, and the late Michael Jackson, the wonderful whiskey writer, referred to Old Pulteney as the Manzanita of the North, and I think it's a very apt description. That kind of salinity, that kind of coastal vibe. It's probably certainly the as far as unpeated whiskey goes, probably one of the kind of best examples of that style. Well, I've got a selection box which you've kindly sent up, so I'll pour one of these, Deeks. If you want to tell us what, obviously not what I've got quite yet, but the idea behind it and what I should be pouring first.
Yeah, mate. So in those little bottles that you have, you see that they're numbered quite poorly because I was in a hurry. But you should be legible enough that you can make out a 1, 2, and 3. So the idea is it's Christmas. Does everyone get at Christmas? We all get a selection box. Of course we do. In fact, one of my favourite little sides that I'm having at the minute is a cheeky wee box of Maltesers that I always love to have with a dram. And this is just a wee selection box of whiskies because it's about try and do things. You know, that's the beauty of what we get to do at this time of year. You know, is we've got a couple of days where we don't have to go to work maybe quite so early, or we've got a bit of time to try out more than just a couple of drinks in an evening as well. And so that's the idea behind this. What I will let you in to know a little bit about is that none of these are from the same country, but I guess that's where the intrigue should come from as well, because I mean, one of the things I'd like to talk about, I suppose, during this is, you know, what is it like, you know, being in the industry for yourself, Simon? You know, being Aussie, I know you've lived in Scotland for, I think you said about 11 years. I mean, for me, it feels like you've been there a lot longer. It certainly looks it. Yeah, just, I mean, as we go through these, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on the whiskies, but also, how do you feel about the whiskey industry in general? Do you feel like an outsider looking in? Do you feel part of it now? Is it a Scotch whiskey thing that you're really into, or is this a global network thing that you know you love doing and feel part of?
I mean, it's a really interesting question, because obviously Scotch whiskey can feel at times a little bit separatist and a little bit kind of you know, individual, in the same way as I guess historically you might have had like kind of French wine and then they just referred to everything else as New World, that kind of attitude. But you know, really these days I've been working with a company that's so whiskey focused, as opposed to previously working in the on trade, which, you know, I might be working in a whiskey bar, but you're still selling gin and tonics and wine and pouring pints and talking about everything. And now being kind of, I guess, a step further immersed in the whiskey quagmire, you know, I find it is very welcoming. And you know, I mean, the fact that I'm an Aussie kind of very rarely is even kind of mentioned or discussed. And you know, I was lucky enough to go back to Australia for a couple of years and work in a distillery there in the wonderful Archie Rose in Sydney, and meet people in such like-minded kind of frames of mind as us. You know, with a huge respect for Scotland, and obviously a kind of admiration, and you know, that there's kind of Scotland that is this kind of ethereal mentor for a lot of whiskey makers across the world for very obvious reasons. But no, I think it is a worldwide community now, and it's really nice because we've all found this one thing, and your one thing in life that brings you together can be model airplanes, it can be train spotting, it can be whiskey, you know. And I think that people are drawn to that. It's a universal thing, you know. There's an appreciation for the art, there's an appreciation for the flavor for obvious reasons, and you know, it's really easy to make bonds with other whiskey heads across the world. And you'll always disagree. Some people prefer American. Some people think, you know, blends are better. Scotch single malts are better. Some people think the Japanese have refined the art, and some people think that you know, the Canadians are cheating and the Irish, you know, they don't quite understand. You know, there's all sorts of opinions. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is we'll all sit down for a dram together and enjoy it. And I really kind of think that we're very lucky to work in the industry because we found something that's not only a hobby and a vocation, but we've turn it into a profession, or there was a profession there for us to enter. It's turned into a profession long before I got into it. But, you know, I think that translates so broadly now across so many countries. And, you know, as you've just said, these are all from different countries. And I'm going to pour number one, Deeks, if that's an appropriate place to start, one would assume. But with so many people...
Nah, don't start at number one, whatever you do.
No.
Nah.
Go,
actually, no, for real, starting with it, go in reverse order, go 3, 2, 1. That's how advent calendars work, right?
Yeah, sure, why not? I just thought you just give the upside down tasting to the Australian.
The koala tasting, love it.
but there's obviously a lot more countries now in the world that can see whiskey as being a home product. It can be something that they produce, you know. And I think the pride is, I mean, there's more distilleries in Australia than in Scotland now, you know, and that's growing in so many countries. So I think it's, while it could be easy to feel like an outsider looking in these circumstances, the nature and the fraternal nature of the industry certainly prevents that in my experience.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that as well. You know, I certainly felt that coming from Scotland that, you know, particularly you have so many marketing campaigns and a lot of brand ambassadorship, particularly across the old Scotch whiskey distilleries that are put out there. It's very visible, you know, and I think now more than ever, because I'm not directly working within the on trade, I probably perceive these things a lot more like a consumer than what I've ever done before. And so actually, yeah, that's what I'm seeing out in, the shops or on the TV, or even if it's just like bus shelter adverts or anything like that. That's what's very visible to me. So it's an interesting aspect to hear, particularly from a global perspective, that as you say rightly, that fraternal sort of community that we've got is extended and certainly goes out there, and it's about sharing those ideas. And one of the reasons, again, I wanted to try a few different varieties of whiskey was just to see, how are they being produced, and what influence does that have, and how much does geography really have an impact on the flavour, or are we all learning different techniques for distilling, fermentation, all sorts, down to the aging and how we're aging and what we're aging them into, because I think having that global network now where we're all so close, ideas are shared like super, super quick. And that's really exciting for anyone who's into flavour, as you rightly point out, and certainly into the aspect of how we can develop the whiskey industry coming out of 2020, which has been a strange one to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite interesting, when you talk about how much does place dictate, and I think the short answer to that is less and less, because of that sharing of ideas, because of the World Wide Web and the ability to access information, to access past experiences, all that kind of thing. Whereas anything, especially when Scotch whiskey came about, would have been so localized. I mean, just the Old Pulteney you were talking about there, which, as you say, has got salinity to it. It tastes like a coastal maritime malt, which is obviously now part of their marketing. But I'm not sure exactly when Old Pulteney was founded. But it was at a time when it would have been the kind of heart of the herring fishing industry in Scotland. It was set up in Wick by the sea. Now, whoever set a distillery up did not say, it's going to be great on a whiskey tin in 100 years' time, is saying it's a maritime malt. They would have been by the sea, eating lots of herring, and the culture and the cuisine and everything like that would have led them to prescribe and to enjoy and to develop a coastal style of whiskey. Like any other cuisine, like any other booze all across the world, it's down to culture and place and people. Nowadays, yes, it is marketed as a maritime malt. Talisker is marketed as made by the sea, all this kind of thing. But that's not what was the vision when these places were set up. And then you go to Speyside, and especially kind of the middle of the Speyside, you go to Mortlach and Delewin and Benrinnes, and you get these really meaty drams that are really savoury. And they're in the middle of the country. So people up there would have probably been eating things like venison, and the palate would have developed them. So again, people, place, and culture would have led them to develop a completely different style of malt based on their cuisine. And like we see in every other country making wine or brandy or sherry or whatever the local delicacy is, it reflects what people were experiencing at the time. But you transport that to Australia, where all the distilleries in Australia come up in the last 30 years. So there will have been a marketing aspect to it. That industry existed, and there will have been the exchange of information to develop styles of their choosing and of a predetermined nature, not based simply on where they are. And also leaving some shackles behind of previous conventions of production. So while there is historically certainly an element of place in these whiskies, it's interesting to see what can be produced all across the world that can be very reminiscent of historical Scottish styles, but can be from very, very new distilleries.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of which, what do you think of this little dram here? And talk us through what you're tasting, what you're experiencing.
It tastes like a sherried whiskey to me on the palate. It has a bit of that kind of richness to it, but it has something about it that it's either kind of a bit of like a whack of PX, or it's something slightly left of center that I'm missing. A Moscatel, a Marsala, or possibly even kind of a Sauterne maybe, or Madeira. There's a lot of the crossovers and flavors there, and it's so easy to reach for sherry as a go-to because there's so much of it. But often that kind of belies a slightly different cask. It's got a really nice light cereal note to it. It's, I'd say, around about 46% ABV, which would lead me to believe it's, I don't know. The different countries thing always throws you. It could be a 3-year-old tropical age, or it could be a 12-year-old temperate age. But it is delicious. It's got some really nice weight. A bit dry on the finish, but whatever it is, Deeks, I'm very much enjoying it.
Yeah, good, good. Yeah, you picked out a lot of interesting points there, certainly. So this is actually an Irish whiskey. It's from Teeling, who are a distillery based in Dublin city centre itself. So they came out with this Brabazon series. This is from series 1. It's a lovely little bottling. This don't see too much of it around these days. They've done a couple more releases since of it, but essentially you're bang on. It's a sherry finish, but with it being a blend of malted and unmalted grains that are used in it, that's totally where I pick up. And for me personally, I get this aspect of like port finish on the back of it, particularly like a tawny style port. And it's just really interesting dram for that very reason. And because it's got that rich sherryness about it, it's like it's got the shirt of, you know, a proper Highland Scots malt, but underneath it is the beating heart of an Irish whiskey. And I think there's a lot of interest in Irish whiskey just now, certainly, and it's the quality and the volume of distilleries opening up there is just amazing, actually. But they're all coming together, these different techniques. Now, the odd thing about this is the liquid's actually from the Cooley distillery, so it's been, you know, hand selected by the guys at Teeling and then aged by them. So I think, you know, with a brand like Teeling, which is, you know, I think probably even less than 10 years old, they've got access to great stocks, but they're now producing their own liquid itself, and they've got all the history and production techniques that have gone before them to now be applied to these new whiskies that they're producing. It's a really interesting time, particularly with the global interest in Irish whiskey as well. That's why I wanted to try this one out on you for size.
Absolutely, and you know, the kind of inherent side of Irish whiskey that is kind of blended. You know, Irish whiskey tends to be, you know, unnamed as such, but just a blend of grain and malt, and you know, this kind of bias against blended whiskey. You know, anything like a blend should be better than the sum of its parts. That's the idea of blending. And unless you're drinking something that says single cask on the label, you're drinking a blend of something. So a blend of ages, possibly a blend of casks, possibly, you know, a blend of distillates even from the same distillery. So, you know, I think that's where the kind of real, you know, art in whiskey can come from, is that blending. And the Irish and the Japanese have not even thought about that for decades. That's just what whiskey is. And you know, and it's only really a bias in Scotch whiskey where single, as in coming from one place, makes it inherently better. But I mean, all my cooking comes from the one stove. Doesn't mean it's good.
That's what we look at.
The idea of something coming from one place making it better is it can only be farcical, surely.
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting conversation. I think, you know, that idea of geography, and again, in this bizarre year that we've had, you know, although we can't actually get to each other as easily as what we did, the connectivity that we have is really shrunk. How we can share these ideas, I think, and yeah, I think that's really interesting aspect about some of these whiskies.
Well, I mean, you're hugely right. I mean, if I say to you to do this, I'll just Zoom you. You know what that means now. You wouldn't have 12 months ago. I know what I've known to say. You know, it's amazing how things have evolved. Well, I think, you know, in the spirit of both receiving and giving, Deeks, I think I'll let you pour the whiskey I've sent you.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Hang on, I just need to. Before I get these mixed up. Right, so this is a little danger vial that you've picked up here. Oh, hang on, it's really well wrapped. Oh, it's like a wee early Christmas present. This, look at this.
So this is a whiskey that I picked for a number of reasons, some of which will become evident in time. But it is a Scottish whiskey, I will tell you that much. But apart from that, I guess I'll just let you have a go at it and see what you think.
Right. I'm just swilling it around my palate a little bit so I can get my head around it before I get my gums around it. So
it's always interesting sharing drams. You know, I've been doing this with some friends. I think I've mentioned it before on this. We've been doing about a weekly tasting in this kind of format, 4 of us, exchanging drams safely which at one point was kind of throwing them at each other across the street, and then obviously things relaxed and got stricter again. We've always played by the rules, but made sure that we can sit down with some blind tastings from all of us once a week in the Zoom format. And they're numbered. And in fact, the number on your bottle just happens to be S28, which was just along the way, which means it's the 28th sample from Simon. But the samples I gave out this week were S60 to 63, and have received the same back. So we think we've done 300 samples between us since March.
Wow.
The fascinating thing is that we've been doing it blind. Everything is completely unknown. So that we've included what we call banter bottles, which is going and buying basically supermarket whiskey and presenting them to other whiskey heads and trying them blind, which almost exclusively have been really enjoyed, which is, says a lot about, about our preconceptions. But, it's funny trying to, as you're doing now, sample something blind when you've got no context whatsoever. Your brain can lead you in so many kind of various ways.
Yeah. Well, what I'd say is, I suppose kicking off, it's definitely got a bit of spice to it as well. So it's making me think that this isn't a Highland malt. It's certainly of that ilk. It's got a really nice sort of like chalky like undertone to it as well, sort of pulling out quite a bit of minerality in terms of like orchard fruits, I guess, a little bit of that. Pretty short finish, but it does feel like it's relatively, I'm going to say this is a 40% ABV malt. I don't think it's going to be much more than that. But it's a nice drop. It's got nice warmth to the finish as well. This is definitely something I think I would quite happily have a wee drop of after my tea, much like my Pulteney, to be honest.
Well, it's really interesting you say that, because that is a single malt from Glendronach Distillery in the Highlands. It's a 12-year-old single cask. It's a PX cask. It's bottled at, rather embarrassingly, it's actually in this decanter here. So I haven't got the info on me because in the cart box is somewhere, but it was bottled between 56 and 57% ABV. It's a 12-year-old PX from about 2005. It was distilled.
Wow.
And the reason I chose it was a couple of things. Firstly, if I was to pick 3 Desert Island Drams, regardless of what bottling it was, there would be a Glendronach in there 100% because it's one of my all-time favorites. As you know, it was what was served at my wedding. I love it as a distillery, and especially some of these single cask offerings. To me, they are amazing. But it was bottled by our very good friends Mike Aikman and Jay Scott under the Bramble Bar at the time before Bramble Whiskey Co. started. So it was bottled as a single cask by then, actually in conjunction with my now employers, Roll My Whiskies, about what would have been about 3 years ago. So just before I started working for Mike and Jace, they bottled this. So not only is it one of my favorite distilleries, but one of my previous employers who I enjoyed working for, and some of the best guys in the trade. So I thought, since we're talking about our trade as well as Island Drams, it was definitely an appropriate one.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And do you know what? I think it speaks volumes about how beautifully rounded this is. If that is above 50% ABV, but it's so soft in my palate, I tell you what, that is a stunning wee drop. That, yeah, lovely. Yeah, nice. And I mean, talking of Desert Island Drams, what kind of an island are we talking about here? Is it one where you've only got 3 drams there for the rest of your life, or how do you want to? How would you do it? Would you pick like something for your everyday and then something for a special occasion, like every time a package washed up for you, a new pair of pants or something like that? Maybe it's a pair of socks for your Christmas, like how do you start picking out your desert drams, and what else would you have in there?
Well, it's an interesting one, and I think this is the 20th episode I've done of this, and the rules are kind of pretty simple. You get 3 bottles, each one is filled with a dram of your choosing, and they perpetually refill with that specific dram. I'll allow you a lemon and or lime tree on the island, and let's say there's a bottle of gom kicking about in case, So for a lot of people in the trade, that means one's going to be straight away a white rum so they can make daiquiris.
I think I'd have to have as much variety in there as possible. For me, my go-to is in terms of that special treat, and I would want to have my special Scotch treat in there. It would have to be a Lagavulin 16, and I guess for me, like there's a good bit of nostalgia about thinking about Lagavulin and the 16-year-old in particular. When I started getting into Scotch and actually I probably got there via American whiskey and drinking that mixed. I tried a Talisker 10-year-old when I was about 21 years old. And I was round at my local Edinburgh pub at the time, which was Tuchter's in the West End. Which at the time, I'm sure they still do have a phenomenal selection of malts there as well. But I tried it, and I remember it going down so well. I had 3 or 4 more, and I was a student at the time and thought, this is just brilliant. I can't believe I've never got into this before. But of course, that was me getting into first gear of my single malt experience, and like driving any kind of amazing car or anything like that. Actually, you get the most torque when you pull into second gear. And I think the second big whiskey experience I had was drinking a Lagavulin 16. Just how big and smoky, but how sweet and rounded it was as well. And I've never got past that. I think you can crank the peat up beyond what a Lagavulin is. And for me, it closes down the rest of my palate. And if you dial it down a wee bit from there, it's not quite satisfying. That sort of salinity that we talked about with Pulteney that I deeply love as well. And so it just there's all parts of my palate, and for that I love it. And that's certainly where my starting point would be for my desert drams.
Yeah, I've not kept a record as such. I should probably do a spreadsheet up. But Lager 16 has definitely come through a few times because it is that kind of, such a go-to peated whiskey. And I think it was the one that opened the door for me for Islay whiskies a decade or so ago as well. The balance of it, the richness, the smoke, and I think these days the distillers edition might kind of edge it out for me a little bit because of that PX finish and me being something of a sherry head. But I think Lagavulin and what is created there is something very special at any age. Actually, the younger stuff can be really chocolatey and interesting, and then the older stuff becomes kind of complex and elegant in different ways as well. It's certainly a hell of a distillery.
Yeah, and what location as well. And we talk about that ethereal aspect of a lot of where Scotch is produced in locations. And Islay is just one of those places that's so incredibly special, just unto itself, but obviously because of it being its own specific region for Scotch production. But just the island itself has a whole vibe that if you've ever been there and you get the opportunity to go there, it's very difficult to try and capture it. But what they've done with each of those bottlings is, again, it's very personal to yourself, is they've really captured that sense within the flavors in those bottles. And to me, that's the genius of a distiller. What they're able to do is capture, if we're going to talk about geography, if they can capture somewhere, that's as amazing as somewhere like Islay and get that in a bottle, to me, that's a winner all year round. So yeah, that's definitely a starting point for me.
Yeah, so when something you're drinking makes you think of the place where it's made, that's something very, very impressive, I think.
Oh, for sure.
That associative memory. One question I was going to ask you, Deeks. Now, Deeks, I've known you for, it must be a decade, really, all in all, just about.
Feels longer.
It does, yeah, it does. But, and we've kind of worked together on certain things. We've done a lot of stuff. But you've had... we've worked for a couple of different companies along the way, but you've always been working for companies with a portfolio. You've never looked after one brand or even one category. And over the years, I bought vodka from you, I bought gin from you, I bought Sambuca, rum, whiskey, American and Scotch, and myriad others from you. Now, every category has its own characteristics. It has its own kind of ups and downs, pros and cons. And we've talked to people on here about kind of some rum heads, some gin guys and whatever. And, sometimes the fans can be a bit frustrating. Sometimes, the marketplace, gin example is sort of flooded at the minute. But every category also has its positives. It has, for rum, you've got the tiki fun time, set shit on fire angle. For whiskey, you've got the beautiful places that you can visit, like Islay and Speyside and whatever. Of all those, what did you kind of find the most fun? Like what category in general, not brands necessarily, or particularly distilleries, what category do you have like fun memories of more than others?
I mean, that's such a tricky one to answer because, as you rightly point out, you know, every category has its own aspect and its own way of doing things. And you know, we wouldn't be having this conversation, you know, about whiskey if it wasn't for how much enjoyment I've got from Scotch whiskey in particular, but then what that's led on to as well, and where that's taken me, which, you know, includes going to Kentucky and visiting a couple of distilleries out there. I guess, like, you know, taking it away from whiskey, you know, what do I find loads of fun? I found the Italian spirits great fun. Very fortunate at my time at High Spirits, we had a brand called Fernet Branca in our portfolio, which is a very acquired taste. It's extremely bitter. It's full of about 42 different herbs and spices, including things like saffron and mint and all sorts. And we don't really have those bitter flavors within British cuisine too often, but it's a way of basically being able to aid your digestion out there. And so every time that you're out, and in Italy they have incredible food, there always seems to be an opportunity for either, you know, a spritzer or some kind of, you know, bitter aperitif. And very often, if you find yourself too full at any point during a meal, you're going to have a cheeky little Fernet Branca or something along those kind of lines as well. And I love that because, you know, going out for a drink becomes a real experience when you're in Italy and somewhere like that. That has that culture. I guess it's Mediterranean culture as well, to be honest, not just Italy. But being able to, I guess, you know, eat to your heart's content without feeling too full, like you need to go for a nap or anything like that. But also being able to have enough food that you don't end up, you know, too bevied after like 10 lagers and 8 whiskies or anything like that. It's a really nice, steady way of enjoying an evening of both food, flavour, and of course the people that you're with as well. So yeah, like Italians are great fun as well. You know, it's. I mean, I say that's a very sweeping statement. You know, it's 60 odd million Italians out there too. But I found in particular when I've mentioned that I'm neither American or English, but actually Scottish, and the arms get thrown open, and they want to show you all of the hospitality that they've got as well. And that's wherever I've been in Italy too, which is. Yeah, really good fun, and certainly cutting around the canals of Milan during the early hours, not really knowing where we're going, but getting an arm thrown around us and carried into a nightclub, which doesn't happen too often anywhere else in the world. It was just so yeah, I guess yeah, a real favourite memory for me, and yeah, why I love that country and all the food and drink you get from there as well. But Amaros for me, the bitter aspect you get from them, and different ways and times we can drink them. Yeah, love it. Absolutely love it. Great fun.
I have to say, I'm a big fan of the kind of time-specific drinking idea. You know, having a plan for your drinking. But I mean, beyond that, though, I mean that Mediterranean kind of method of, as you say, the food and drink going hand in hand. You know, the sundown or the aperitivo hour kind of thing. You know, followed by, you know, food and wine and all of it being paced. And you know, although it's obviously not compulsory, you know, sometimes you do find yourself a lot of the time in anglicized culture, and I include Australia in this, having, you know, a massive meal rather quickly to then drink beer. And
yeah.
While that's fine, and that has been the context of some of the best nights of my life, that kind of progressive experiential way of doing an evening at times can be lovely. And, you know, I used to always make a point every so often of going out and not drinking beer, especially if you're a beer drinker. It's such a go-to. You just get a pint, and then, you know, that's kind of, so as opposed to going out and just having a Negroni and then having, you know, maybe a glass of champers or a spritz or something with some food, with starter, you know, or, you know, literally some aperitif, and then maybe some wine with dinner, and then looking at some cognac or Armagnac, or indeed, you know, some Amari of some description or a Fernet. And, you know, while maybe it's not in our culture to do that every night, and that's also absolutely fine, making a point of it every so often, just to slowly enjoy your food and booze. In that kind of way, you know, especially if you have enough of it, you'll sound like me. But you know, if to do that in that kind of long, slow process, it's just lovely occasionally, because it is such a different way to what we're used to a lot of the time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You know, and it's, I think, you know, looking forward to 2021, when we can actually go out and actually spend quality time with people again in public houses, as we're all hoping we can. Being able to do it in a way that's it's mature It's not causing any bother, but you're spending quality time with the people that you're with is something I'm really, really looking forward to as well. And certainly bringing that Italian aspect of aperitivo time is something I intend to bring to everyone I know. So yeah. But I mean, it's an interesting thing about foreign cultures. And actually, if you wouldn't mind picking up dram number 2 here.
Absolutely.
And just get your gums around those plums, pal, and see what you make of that. And while you're doing that, I'll just, I'll show our viewers. Actually, I've borrowed Simon's T-shirt for tonight, which is the cynicism part, because although it's the Christmas special, we all know that there's certain aspects that we want to take away from the trade, and I guess as you're swilling that around and giving that a go, if there was one thing that you could take away from the trade that exists, that you wouldn't want to exist coming out of 2020, what would that be for you, do you think? And how would you do it?
You know what? There's a lot of things, and a lot of them are kind of quite compartmentalized. So there's kind of small aspects of the way certain factions or aspects of the industry behave. Especially if I'm talking the on-trade, so I'm talking about people who serve, which is how you and I fell in love with what we do now. And I think, as a bread and butter, no one around it exists. Brand ambassadors, people in my job as a wholesaler and yours as a supplier in their portfolio, makers, all this kind of thing, they don't exist in the way they do without people serving. So it is a hugely important crux. But at times, there are various things that kind of do piss me off in the way various bits of it behave. But I think if I could have one generalized thing, I think it would be the acknowledgement that we're all doing the same thing. Now, I don't mind, you might be deconstructing martinis in weird ways and making shrubs and doing all sorts of things and using smoke guns and, 17 staff to serve one cocktail an hour. And that's great. But for every one of those, there is someone serving 15 pints a minute and countless things in between. Running foods, clearing plates, running passes, mise en place, bartenders in service bars, and or sommeliers and everything in between. And the idea that one has worth over another to me is somewhat frustrating. You'll hear even people like me and probably you and people I talk to about, when I was just a pub bartender. No, you were still a bartender. You were still doing the same thing as all the rest of us. And and every one of them has challenges. I mean, I've worked in pubs where I was just serving pints and gin and tonics, but I had to do it to 12 people at a time. And that can be pretty stressful. Whereas if you're making cocktails, 3 orders at a time is probably just as stressful because it's more involved. But it all takes a skill set. And we're all doing the same thing, which is getting liquid from one receptacle to another. We're all getting the juice from behind the bar to the front of it and trying to make the people have a good time. Whether it's pints attendants, whether it's a craft ale bar, whether it's a sommelier or in a natural wine bar, serving weird wines with funny colors, whether it's, restaurant service, event service, all this sort of thing. And if we all come out of this going, fuck, that's the worst year we've collectively ever had, maybe we are all in the same boat. That would be kind of really appreciative to me, because I see people in my local pub who feel intimidated by some of the chat that I experienced in my side of things, or shying away from it, or being a bit I guess concerned about their lack of experience, which we all were in that same boat once. And I see people in the higher end of things and different end of things looking sideways or down on others. And I just think we're all doing the same thing. We're all in the same industry. And when something like a great level like COVID comes along, that becomes very apparent. So I think, for one thing, I don't care if you're working in Wetherspoons or in the Savoy, I'll have a beer and a shot with you at the bar no matter what when this is all over.
Yeah.